Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Neighborhood Trouble, submitted by Raven262. My brother and sister-in-law and their kids all decided to travel to California to visit my mom. We hadn't seen her due to COVID, so we were excited to go and spend some time with her. I was flying single as the fun uncle, and was looking forward to seeing my brother and his family as well as my mom. She lives in a gated community, and when we flew in, we got through, and my mom showed us how to get through the gate and where the community pool was, and we were just excited to be together for the first time in over a year and a half. My brother has a little girl and a brother who is 3 years older. They're 4 and 7. Really good kids. They're not troublemakers, but they are still kids. So the trouble began when we went to the community pool one afternoon. It's a much older crowd in my mom's neighborhood, and almost everybody there was really great and super nice. All the older ladies doting over my niece, and a lot of the older guys encouraging my nephew in the pool. He'd been swimming for a while, but he was doing some laps trying to avoid the older folks who were just soaking or hanging out. But of course, there's always one asshole in every crowd. This one guy kept yelling at my nephew about his splashing. And mind you, all he was doing was freestyle crawl up and down the pool, just kicking his legs and going slow. He wasn't racing, but this guy just kept yelling about it. I happened to be in the pool while my brother and sister-in-law were hanging out on their chairs and watching over my niece. So I went over to the guy and introduced myself and said, "Hey, I'm his uncle. He's not hurting anybody, but if it's really bothering you that much, we can come back later when you're not here." The guy looked at me dead in the eyes and said, "Why are you even here?" I could tell that something was going on with this guy, whether it was meds or something else, but he just seemed a little off-kilter. He then told me to get my effing nephew out of the pool or he was going to call the HOA. I didn't want to cause trouble, so I called out to my nephew and say, "Hey, little dude, we got to get out of the pool." Of course he was bummed, but I told him that we would come back. And the guy just stood in the pool with his arms crossed staring at us. I went over to my mom and said, "Hey, that guy just told us we should leave because the little dude here is swimming too much." My mom just rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, yeah, he's kind of a pain." All right, no big deal. I figured we would just come back another time, and if that guy was there, we would avoid the pool and figure out something else to do. My brother was really pissed, but I calmed him down and said, "Man, look, it's not worth it. This guy is just an old coot. Let it go." The next morning, I went out for a run around the neighborhood. As I was jogging, just listening to my headphones, I heard a beeping from behind me. Mind you, this was like 7 a.m., and no one was out, except for, you guessed it, the same clown from the pool. He was directly behind me, honking his horn and waving his arm out the window. I slowed down and got onto the grass, and he pulled up next to me with his window rolled down and started yelling at me that I shouldn't be on the road running, and I was supposed to be on the sidewalk. Again, trying to be the good guy, I thought, okay, no big deal, and said the same to him. I apologized and said, "I'll run on the sidewalk," even though I knew I didn't have to do that. So he drove away and I continued my run, just listening to my headphones again. Honestly, I think it was one of your podcasts that I was listening to. When I got to the gate of the neighborhood, I turned around and started running back. What do you know? Suddenly I hear beeping again, but now in front of me. It's the same guy. Now he's yelling at me that I shouldn't be running on the sidewalk or grass because people pay for the landscaping and I'm ruining it. At this point, I started to get pretty pissed because this guy was clearly just harassing me. I stood there staring at him until he finally drove away and went out through the gate. Then I just jogged back to my mom's place, told my brother and my mom about that guy again. My mom didn't want to start any trouble, and I don't blame her, because that can be really crazy in a neighborhood with older folks and all the nonsense and trouble that they can cause. But she was angry and said the next time she saw him she was going to say something, that we were okay to be there. We were just visiting, and he didn't need to be harassing us. That evening we all went to the pool and no one was there. So my niece and nephew got to jump into the water and swim around without bothering anyone else that normally would be there. A couple of older folks did come by and just sat in the chairs laughing and enjoying their evening while we were enjoying ours. But of course, here comes the dick. I swear to God, he was following me around for whatever reason. I don't know if he didn't like the way I looked. I don't know if it's because I have long hair or what, but he was not bothering anybody in my family, just me. He started yelling about the kids in the pool, but everyone shouted him down and told him that he needed to just leave and let the kids have fun. He eventually left, but not after pointing his finger at me. That evening, I had to run into town to get some stuff while my brother and sister-in-law got the kids ready for bed. I went to a grocery store to get some things, and as I was checking out, I saw that guy out of the corner of my eye. He had followed me there. I need to tell you, this guy was in his late 60s, early 70s. Not in bad shape, but still not in the shape that I am. But I couldn't figure out what his problem was with me. He didn't even buy anything, but he followed me out into the parking lot over to my car, which was actually my mom's. He proceeded to punch the trunk and tell me that I was not wanted around here. I actually laughed out loud and said, "Dude, what is your effing problem? Seriously, I'm just here to visit my mom. And why the hell are you following me?" Before he could answer, I decided, man, don't escalate this. I got into the car and started driving home. This is when he started to drive up alongside of me, then get in front of me, slow down, follow me down side streets, just doing anything to continue harassing me. We got back to our neighborhood, and I went through the gate and went straight to my mom's house. I got inside and figured, you know what, again, don't get into anything out here with some guy that you don't know. That night, I heard a tapping on my window in the bedroom I was staying in. I pushed up the little louvers and saw this guy standing outside my mom's condo, and he started saying that I needed to go or there was going to be trouble. That was it. I got up, my brother heard me, and I said, I'm going out to get this guy. So we both went outside, and it was around 1:30 in the morning. This guy was still in the yard, but now had a handgun. I can't tell you what kind, but he was pointing at us and said that we needed to leave in the morning. My brother yelled to my sister-in-law to call the cops. I mean, enough was enough. This guy approached us with the gun pointed right at us, and I said, "Pal, you better put that thing down. You don't want to go to jail." I was still trying to be cool, but also stick up for my family. He kept advancing, and I could tell he was either drunk or high on something because he just started to yell. I was backing up and thankfully opened my mom's garage with the garage door opener on the outside. He brought his gun up, pointed it at me, literally 5 feet away from me. And I grabbed the only thing that I could grab out of the garage, which was a coil of garden hose. The guy started screaming all kinds of stuff about white power, and I'll be totally honest here, I am white. But then he kept going on about how we didn't belong out here, and how we needed to get out. I still have no idea why he had such an issue with us. We didn't do anything. So I ended up swinging the garden hose at him and hit him right in the side of the head. And this is where everything went crazy, because he dropped the gun, but it went off. I wasn't aware that could actually happen with a gun, that it could just fire on its own. Shows you how much I know about firearms. But of course now everybody in the community came out, and he was saying that I took the gun away from him and tried to kill him. I'm sweating bullets, no pun intended. I was saying, no, this guy came over here to harass us. Thankfully, I had kicked the gun into the grass, and because it was too dark, he couldn't find it. And in his unsober mind, he was looking for it, but couldn't find it or pick it up. So then he decided to lunge at me and grab me by the legs and threw me down onto the concrete driveway. That's when I really had had enough. I rolled over and used my jiu-jitsu training. Yeah, I'm really into jiu-jitsu. And I just started to choke him out. All the neighbors were now there watching me do this, and the cops rolled up to see what was going on. They pulled me off the guy, and it took a lot because I was so pissed and just wanted this guy to go to sleep. The guy then took a swing at one of the cops, and that was it. I have never been a proponent of police brutality, but I was also not going to stop them from slamming this guy back onto the ground, dragging him yelling, and then slamming him onto the hood of the car. He kept yelling all the time about this silly stuff, white power, and no one knew what the hell he was talking about. We did find out that he was on some kind of medication that he had taken too much of, and had been taking too much of it over the course of a couple of months. They figured that's why he was off all the time, and why people didn't understand what was wrong with him. He was arrested and taken away, and that's really the last I've heard about any of it. My mom said the people in the HOA were talking about not allowing him to come back, the last I heard. I don't know if they can do that or not, but I'm sure they can make his life a living hell. You're familiar with HOAs are capable of. They asked if I wanted to press charges, but when I found out that he was on meds, I said no. I don't think he really meant to hurt me or kill me, but they did charge him with second-degree something or other, and again, that's the last I heard about any of it. I've never had a gun pointed at me since, but I can assure you that it is a terrifying moment in life when you know if it's a real gun, if it's an airsoft, or if it's a BB gun. Scarily, this one was real. Thank God I got it away from him before he could have shot me or my brother. For a couple of days, it was full of still speaking with the police to make sure that they understood the entire situation. My niece and nephew didn't need to see any of that, and neither did my mom for that matter. But as I said, I didn't press any charges, but I do think that justice was served, and I didn't have to show up for anything other than the deposition that I did the next day. My mom has not seen him in the neighborhood, which leads me to believe that he's probably in jail somewhere. I mean, what a loser. I'm just glad that it was me and my brother outside, and nobody else in my family. My Escape, submitted by Junebug. I'm sharing this experience with you, but I want to make everyone know right away that my name is not June, but I'm going by Junebug. My parents got me into a cult when I was a little girl. I didn't really have a choice. They were already in, and I'm not going to name names or anything like that either. But I was in, and I will say it's not the one that's always on TV that a lot of the actors talk about. It's not the one that I know will come to mind for a lot of your listeners. This was a smaller cult, but a cult nonetheless. My parents thought it was a church, but they ended up becoming so involved that we lived in apartment buildings run by the organization, which is what I would call it, because it's not a church. It was really weird being there. I mean, as kids, we would go to school, but immediately had to go right back home, and we were not allowed to do any extracurricular activities like sports, the theater, or band, or anything like that. Everything was monitored, and we were watched all the time. My parents both had jobs they would go to during the day, but again, right after 5, everyone had to go back to what I'll just call a compound. We weren't allowed to go anywhere without permission and had to ask to even see my grandparents and extended family. It was a weird way to grow up, and I was there from the age of 3 up until 15. Even if we wanted to go for a walk around the neighborhood, we had to ask for permission. Most of the time, they just wanted us praying and doing stuff around the church and the other buildings on what I have already called the compound. My parents ended up getting a divorce, and my dad left the organization. He moved away to Tennessee, and we were still in Pennsylvania. It was really tough because I loved my dad so much, and we never got to see him. I lived with my 2 younger brothers who also felt the same way. But for whatever reason, they were always allowed to go visit my dad, but I was not. I don't know why that is, and at this point it doesn't matter. My mom forbade my dad to have full custody of any of us. I would try to call my dad, but every time I tried to make a call out, they said the call could not go through. My mom did not want me using her cell phone to call my dad, and would stop me any time she caught me trying to get a hold of him. One day when I was at school, I broke down and told one of my friends what was going on. She always thought that something was funny because I never got to play after school or go see her on the weekends. She said that I should tell her teacher, but I knew that would just get me in trouble with my mom if I said anything. I should say that this place looked totally normal, a church with some buildings behind it. No one had any idea what was actually going on there, and I don't think anybody really cared. So one day, we were on a weekend in the compound, and again, we could not leave on the weekends. But I overheard the guy next door talking about his upcoming doctor's appointment. He, like my mom, had a car, but they always wanted something to be with anyone who left. the compound on the weekends especially, if they weren't going to their jobs. I don't know why that was the way it was, and I should state for the record that I'm only 17 now, so please forgive me for my bad writing. I'm hoping I'm making this as clear as I can. I decided to save up all of my money, but I knew that when I graduated from high school, I was going to college and hopefully get away from all this weird cult stuff. I was so tired of having to just pray and hang out in the same buildings all the time. I also want to say that this wasn't like some satanic thing where there were sacrifices or whatever. It was just a weird service organization where we had to go to services every other night and then on the weekends. So you can imagine how weird it was for me to go to school and not be able to interact with my friends at night or on the weekends. Going back to the story. The guy I overheard that needed to go to his doctor knew someone was going to be with him, and he was going on a Saturday morning. So I woke up early and told my mom I was going for a walk before we had to do our regular services. She said okay. I grabbed all of my money and went out to the car that my neighbor had. I was so nervous, but I went over to his trunk and hit the button and popped it open. It was unlocked. I climbed inside and then shut it behind me. A little while later, because I overheard the guy talking about when his doctor's appointment was, I heard two people get into the car and listened to them chatting as the car moved out of the compound and went to the person's doctor. When we got to the place, my neighbor parked his car and both of the people got out. I waited for a few minutes, then pulled the little lever in the trunk, the little one that glows in the dark. The trunk opened, and I looked out to see if anyone was there. There wasn't anyone. So I hopped out, and honestly, I didn't even know if I closed the trunk. I just started running. I didn't have a cell phone, and I was desperately looking for a payphone, which they really don't exist anymore. But I finally found one outside of a 7-Eleven, about 10 blocks from where I had just gotten out of the truck. I had memorized my dad's phone number and called him, and he answered amazingly. Nobody really answers the phone anymore, not these days, especially if you don't know who's calling. I was crying my eyes out, screaming and babbling, and he told me to calm down and asked me what was going on. I finally told him what was happening, and he asked where I was. To be honest, I had no idea where I was. I was never really allowed to wander around town or do anything for all those years I went to school. Just went back home. My dad said to find the nearest hotel I could, which wasn't hard because I was in an urban area. He said to go to the desk clerk, ask for a room, and immediately have the person call him. I did, and he made arrangements as soon as I got the person to call him. I could stay there, and he would take care of that and then come and get me. My dad said to find the nearest hotel or motel I could, which wasn't hard because I was in an urban area. He said to go to the desk clerk, ask for a room, and immediately call him. And then ask for them to make arrangements so I could stay there, and he would take care of it and then come and get me. So I ran up the street to the first hotel I could find, and I went inside and did just what my dad asked. They did call him, and he made the arrangements and explained to them that I needed a room. I don't know what kind of story he told them, but they said okay. I looked at the business cards and realized I was still in Pennsylvania, and my dad said that he was going to be on his way as soon as I got into my room and called him back. We were in constant contact the whole time. He got on a plane and came to get me. I will say this, it was the first time I had ever had room service, as I was never really allowed to do anything on my own, and it was great. Our food at the compound was kind of bad, but it was all that we got. Later that evening there was a call and a knock on the door, and my dad was standing there, and he swooped me up in his arms, and I just could not stop crying. His phone kept ringing, and he finally turned it off and told me that it had been doing that since the morning. My mother was looking for me. He told me that I was coming home with him and everything was going to be okay. He ended up talking to my mom for days on end while I stayed at his house, not going outside, not doing anything other than watching TV and reading. I also like to draw, so I did that, but I didn't talk to my mom at all. She kept asking to speak to me, and I said I did not want to talk to her, and I was not going back to that place. She threatened to get the police involved, but my dad knew some pretty influential people and made arrangements for my brothers to also move to Tennessee with us. There was nothing that she could do about it this time. I don't know anything about that legal process, but I'm glad that my dad knew some people in high places. The sad thing is, my mom didn't really fight it after a while. I mean, she did when we were all in the cult, but once I was gone, she just gave up on all of us and said good luck. I mean, how sad is that? I have not seen my mom in years, and I do miss her, but she doesn't care. She's still hook, line, and sinker with this weird cult. I know there are some famous places out there that people are critical of, and I can't say anything about them because that's certainly not this place that I was at. This was one place that was only located in Pennsylvania, and again, not like the ones that you see on TV. But it was still a creepy, creepy place, and I'm so happy I got out of there. My brothers now laugh and say I should make a movie about how I got out of there, and they yelled at me at first about how I didn't tell them I was leaving. I mean, they also wanted to leave too. We're all grown up now and living with my dad still. We're all in college and moving on with our lives, but sadly not with my mom. My mom is not a bad lady. She was just into something the rest of us were not. I've sent her letters and cards, but she returns everything without opening them, and she doesn't answer her phone unless it's my dad calling her, and it was some kind of concern about any business that they had to attend to. I'm so happy I can do lots of things in my life now that I wasn't allowed to do before, but it's tough not seeing your mom. I wish my mom nothing but the best. I love her dearly, and I hope someday she will return my cards and letters, or be a part of my life at any level. But I suppose we all have our own walk, and I have to live with that. Jumping into that trunk was the scariest thing I had ever had to do in my life, but it was the best decision that I have ever made, and I look forward to making more good decisions moving forward. I just wish my mom would be part of those. Jerks in the Woods, submitted by Ray S. In my teenage years, my best friend lived in a neighborhood about a 10-minute walk through some woods between our houses. There was a well-beaten path between them, and it was faster than going all the way around on the sidewalks or streets. There was also a clearing about halfway through where people sometimes partied and had bonfires. One night, after hanging out playing video games at my friend's house, I had to get home, and it was around 11. So I grabbed my flashlight and started down the dark path through the woods. And as luck would have it, and in this case bad luck, there were some older guys hanging out around a fire pounding Milwaukee's Best. There were 3 of them, and they were pretty lit as I started to walk by. I just tried to mind my own business when one of the guys said, "Hey kid, come here." I stopped, and after a few seconds said, "Sorry man, I'm already late getting home. Don't want a beating from the old man, right?" There was silence until the same guy said, "Hey kid, get over here. I'm not asking." Shit. I weighed my chances of taking off, but knew they'd probably catch me. So I walked over to them and said, "Hey guys, what's up?" One of them asked how old I was, and I said 13. And the first guy said, "You want a beer?" I shook my head. And then he said, "How much money do you have on you?" I said, "I don't have any," which was the truth. And then he said back, "Well, then you're going to have to pay our toll by pounding a beer." Now, to many guys, this may sound like an amazing opportunity, but my parents were strictly against alcohol, and if I showed up home with beer on my breath, I'd be a dead man. "Guys, look, I really got to get going," I said. And the third guy suddenly jumped up and grabbed my arm. "You're going to pound one or else." I still refused, and the first guy just popped a tab on a beer and started dumping it on my head. I tried pulling away, but the guy grabbing my arm wouldn't let me go. I didn't know how I was going to get out of this. So all of us were standing around the fire, and I noticed a log pointed right at the coals. And as they were laughing at me and saying how they were going to kick my ass for not cooperating, out of nowhere I got an idea. I kicked the log as hard as I could into the fire, and it shot sparks up all over the place. They all started yelling, and the guy who was holding my arm let go, and I just took off down the path. I knew they could outrun me, and I could hear them yelling behind me, but I was terrified running away. And amazingly, I got another good idea. There was a fork in the path with one going back to my neighborhood, and another that went down a steep embankment to a creek. I ran for the creek path, dropped my flashlight at the top, and jumped over the side, and then rolled to the left and hid behind a fallen tree. I heard them coming, and one said, "There's his flashlight!" Suddenly, all three of them came sliding down the embankment right by me. I mean, they were maybe 3 or 4 feet away. Then I watched as their flashlights, probably one of mine, bobbed down the path towards the creek. I waited a minute and then scrambled back up the embankment, got onto the other path, and just ran through the darkness as fast as I could. I couldn't see anything. I was getting hit by weeds, tree branches, totally scratched up. I got back to my neighborhood, got to my house, burst through the back door, and found my parents in the living room. They stared at me standing there trying to catch my breath, and my dad came over and said, "Is that beer?" I nodded, and then through the breaths that I was taking, I told them what happened, and that the guys also stole my flashlight. I was relieved when they believed me. Dad told me to get cleaned up, and both of them said that they were just glad I was safe. I'm pretty sure those guys would have beat me up pretty well if they had caught me. And for a 13-year-old in the middle of the woods, alone, that kind of scared the hell out of me. In fact, it wasn't until I showered and was getting into bed that it really hit me. I could have gotten my ass handed to me. I didn't take the path to see my friends for the longest time, afraid that I would run into those guys, and they would kick my ass. But when I finally did start using the path again, I never saw them again. Hey gang, thanks for listening to Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you would like to hear narrated on my channel, email unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Make sure you hit the notification button. Follow me on social media. All the links to that are in the description below. I know a lot of you have been asking where I've been, and quite frankly, this is not my day job. And I actually went on vacation for the first time in 2 years, so obviously that took up a little bit of my time. So I apologize for not posting as much as I'd like to. I will share this. Something unbelievably scary happened in my town yesterday. I live in the suburbs of Buffalo, New York, well outside the city. But yesterday afternoon, some guy drove 200 miles from the Binghamton area, downstate New York, to a supermarket on the east side of Buffalo, New York, and got out of his car and started shooting people. He killed 10 people, and I think another 8 are injured and still in the hospital. So when I narrate these scary stories and I think about the things that people send to me, I'm thinking about that too. You go in to get a fucking loaf of bread, and somebody who woke up hating the world decides to just shoot everything up. He is in custody. They have him. But it's not going to bring the 10 lives back. So everybody, just be excellent to each other as best you can. Try to see other people's viewpoints, and if you're angry about something, think it through before you start doing crazy shit. And again, everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.